Hello and welcome to episode 68 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the co-founders here at ETR. As always, I'm joined by fellow co-founder Evan Silva. And momentum is really building towards the NFL season now. Baseball in Korea is back. Soccer in Germany is back. NBA has their plans in motion. NHL does as well. Dolphins owner saying this week that he's sure the NFL will be ready to go. There's a lot of other whispers too out there about the NFL being ready to go. So I'm feeling, I guess, more confident than I have recently that we're going to have NFL football this fall. So that's good. That's real good. Anyways, Evan, what's going on?
Yeah, I'm similarly optimistic about the NFL season happening. I'm optimistic. This is the most optimistic easily that I've been in months. And even on down to stuff like preseason taking place. So, yeah, man, it's nice and warm outside, and we're going to talk some quarterbacks today, some late round quarterbacks.
Yeah, so I on today's show we're going to be talking, we're going to be discussing late round quarterback options, which is a topic near and dear to my heart. Some of you guys, probably most of you, have no idea, but in 2000, I mean this is so long ago. I was a freshman in college. In 2000, I won ESPN's overall fantasy football championship. Like out of I don't know, there weren't that many people playing back then. But anyway, shout out to me. I won it. I won a trip to Disney World, which was wild. But my quarterback that year was actually Dante Culpepper. And this was like, before, Russian quarterbacks were a thing, before late round quarterback was a thing. This was Dante Culpepper's first year as a starter for Minnesota. And for those guys that remember Dante Culpepper at his prime, he was an absolute monster. In that first year, 33 passing touchdowns, 7 rushing touchdowns. And he was like a 9th or 10th round pick for me then. So late round quarterback has always just made a ton of sense. We're going to talk a little bit more about why before we get into it here. Before we get to that, I wanted to remind everybody that our 2020 fantasy football draft kit is now live and available on EstablishTheRun.com. Cost is an absurdly cheap $30, and it comes with a $25 credit to use at FFPC. Has all of Evan's rankings, all of Evan's tiers, plus tons and tons and tons of articles and content from me, from Thorman, from Corain, and we're going to be updating it and adding to it all summer. Actually just added today rankings for tight end premium up to 300, includes our kicker and our defense rankings. Anyways, late round quarterbacks. This is not a new concept, obviously, in single quarterback formats. As I mentioned, this is the way I preferred to draft for the last 20 years or so. Quarterbacks are the most replaceable. They're the most projectable in terms of opportunity. Their distribution of outcomes is the tightest, right? Like, the biggest variance you have is how many targets a wide receiver is going to get or how many carries a running back is going to get. All quarterbacks are going to touch the ball in every one of their team's passing plays. I think, though, Evan, like over the last 5 years or so, the market's gotten much sharper, right? Like I know our friend JJ Zacharyson, the late round quarterback himself, has talked about this plenty. Like if you play in these expert leagues, you see like no one take a quarterback until round 10. It's like wild. So of course there's a spot in the mid round somewhere where it can make sense, even from a value perspective, to take a quarterback. So where are you at these days from an overall strategy perspective with late round quarterbacking in single quarterback leagues?
Yeah, the market has definitely gotten sharper with regard to late round quarterback drafting, but still, I still think that there is room for even more value to be acquired in the late rounds, because I still think that people aren't doing it often enough. I mean, we saw last year people still taking Patrick Mahomes in the 2nd and 3rd round. We're going to see that happen again this year with Lamar Jackson. The sort of middle round quarterbacks like that tier, which included Baker Mayfield last year and Aaron Rodgers, and those guys were busts, and that's really a dangerous sort of area to draft quarterbacks, because you're not getting the draft day value, and then when they don't hit, it's really crushing you in terms of opportunity cost. And opportunity cost when you take is when it's really felt when you take a quarterback in the 2nd or 3rd or even like the 5th or 6th round, and you are not using that selection on a running back that can really tilt your chances of winning your league. Whereas the quarterback, just because the position is so replaceable, and I mean they better score at wicked levels week in and week out, and typically they just don't. I mean, the number 1 fantasy quarterback year over year, does not repeat, and we can tie a lot of that into just natural regression, because the guy who is leading all quarterbacks in fantasy points, whether it be Deshaun Watson, whether it be Patrick Mahomes, whether it be Lamar Jackson, is typically leading the NFL in touchdown rate. And they just had a superb, frequency of their pass attempts go for touchdowns in a particular year, and they almost always regress back toward the mean.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, there's a lot of quarterbacks this year that I can get on board with in the later rounds. But the market is pushing them down, Like today we're going to talk about quarterbacks with an ADP of 120 or later. And there are a ton of them. Like the QB9, Matt Ryan, is at 127.2. By the way, I wanted to mention in those FFPC ranks that we just put up in the draft kit, you'll find actual ADP that we now have from FFPC high stakes leagues to 350. So I know, I think it's super valuable just to be able to look at high stakes ADP. You can find that in the draft kit now in the FFPC rankings. But anyways, so today we're going to talk about the options who currently have an ADP of 120 or greater. Some of the ones we like, some of the ones we don't like. So guys who have an ADP above 120 are obviously Lamar and Mahomes. There's also that tier, which I like, but as Evan said, it's kind of pricey. Dak, Kyler, Russ, Deshaun. I like all those guys a lot. They are somewhat pricey, and you'll have to spend a mid-round pick, like Evan alluded to, and then Josh Allen and Tom Brady in the tier after that. And then you start getting into these guys you could consider late round. I mean, I don't really consider Matt Ryan and Carson Wentz late round quarterbacks. They're super solid, but they're just going there because they're not super exciting, and people are waiting on quarterbacks more and more often. Let's start with Carson Wentz, Evan, quarterback 10 in FFPC ADP, 133.2. I mean, I don't think people realize the weapons that Carson Wentz had last year. For much of the year, his wide receiver one was Greg Ward. Like, how can you have big games with Greg Ward as your wide receiver one? And now they have Jalen Reagor. Now they have Alshon maybe healthy. Now they have Goddard and Ertz. So I think things are looking up for Carson Wentz. Do you think there's value in him as your late round quarterback? You can probably get him 10th, 11th round.
Yeah, absolutely. He's one of my favorite, high upside late round quarterback picks this year. So he has, I think that the injury prone narrative has sort of jumped the shark on Carson Wentz. I think that we've gone a little bit too overboard. And I think he has played full 16 game seasons in 2 of his 4 NFL seasons so far. But he left in that playoff game against Seattle with a concussion, which I think could have been argued as a cheap shot by Jadeveon Clowney. Either way, everyone saw that. That creates a sense of, strong recency bias that Carson Wentz is fragile in all this. But I think it's gone a little bit overboard. I think that, this guy has been highly productive, especially on a per game basis and per week scoring over his first 3 NFL seasons. Carson Wentz has been the quarterback 3, the quarterback 13, and the quarterback 12 over the past 3 years. In the quarterback 3 year, which was 2017, he played at a truly MVP level. And then this past season, I think that he showed the ability to carry a deficient team and still be very, very good in fantasy, to be a quarterback 1 in terms of per game scoring. You mentioned the list of wide receivers. I mean, no team addressed the wide receiver position more aggressively this offseason. They are getting back Deshaun Jackson. They're probably getting back Alshon Jeffrey at some point in the season. I think that, they used their first round pick on a wide receiver. They drafted 2 other guys who run in the 4.3 range at receiver. And they're bringing back the best tight end duo in the league and one of the best offensive lines in the league. Carson Wentz, when he is healthy, is one of the better scrambling quarterbacks in the NFL as well. And, I think could be considered a dual threat. And I think that he has the potential, the upside to finish as a top 5 fantasy quarterback. And you're getting him around, quarterback 11, quarterback 12 in terms of ADP.
Yeah, and I'd also add to that they removed Jordan Howard, who was just a 0 in the pass game. They haven't added a big back yet. I mean, I guess you consider the undrafted free agent guy that, but then Carlos Hyde goes ahead and signs with Seattle. So if they sign a veteran back, it'll likely be, I don't know, Devontae Freeman or Lamar Miller, and they're far better in the pass game than Jordan Howard was. And obviously we know Miles Sanders is very, very good in the pass game. We know Boston Scott is very, very good in the pass game. So I think the personnel just sets up better for Carson Wentz for sure. I'm curious if you prefer Carson Wentz to Matt Ryan, because they're going pretty close to each other. Matt Ryan has been so rock solid, over 400, over 4,000 yards, over 20 touchdowns in 9 straight seasons, like never misses games. It's always super healthy. Defense is consistently shaky. And yeah, they're a dog. They have a tough schedule because they're a dog in so many games. They play a lot of good teams, but a lot of these good teams that they play, like you could see shootouts, like New Orleans, you could see a shootout. Tampa, you could see a shootout. They play Kansas City, shootout. Maybe the Packers turn into shootout. Cowboys, Seahawks, like those are all good teams, but they're teams that could also be shootouts. I also mentioned on the last pod we did, Matt Ryan has fared better as a dog, which is unique for a quarterback. Has fared better as a dog than he has as a favorite. So I think it's close between Matt Ryan and Carson Wentz. I don't have a super strong opinion. I think you could argue that Wentz has a higher ceiling. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that Wentz has a higher ceiling and Matt Ryan has a higher floor. One thing that stood out to me when kind of breaking down the Falcons, and I'm going to start publishing some team fantasy previews here pretty soon. I got about 5 done, I do have the Falcons done. Matt Ryan, he's going to play 11 of his 15 fantasy relevant games indoors. He has to face Green Bay, but he catches them in early October. So it should be, relatively warm in Green Bay. He's not having to play them, in late December or anything like that. And then 2 more in Carolina and Los Angeles. And then the 15th game, fantasy relevant game that Matt Ryan is going to play is going to be at Arrowhead in a potential shootout against Patrick Mahomes. And as you mentioned, it's going to be a difficult schedule. And I think that this team is going to be explosive in the passing game in a concentrated passing attack that revolves around Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley and potentially Hayden Hurst. But Matt Ryan, I think, is just a rock solid, safe pick. Love his schedule. And, year in, year out, I think we can count on him to be one of the league leaders in 300-yard games, which, of course, plays really well on DraftKings where you get a bonus and just, speaks to his consistency from a season-long standpoint.
Yeah, I've used Matt Ryan plenty in cash and DraftKings over the years for sure. It's weird to see Aaron Rodgers with an ADP of 151.9, the quarterback 12. People are off Aaron Rodgers because, well, quite frankly, it's been so public that they haven't addressed his weapons at all, that they're going through the season with Allen Lazard as their wide receiver 2, with Jay Sternberger relying upon him a lot. They're talking about undrafted free agents helping Aaron Rodgers, and they're going in there with what looks to be an extreme ball control attack. I mean, they have Jamal Williams, they have A.J. Dillon, they have Aaron Jones. They think they're going to try to play defense and run the ball, and that doesn't fit with Aaron Rodgers too well. We talked about it with Eric Eager, I believe, some about Aaron Rodgers' regression and from an advanced statistics perspective, how far he has declined. From a fantasy perspective, is if we jump the shark on Aaron Rodgers, is he gone too far where you can be had in like 13th, 14th round right now for a guy who we know has annually over the last decade been one of the fantasy's best quarterbacks?
Well, his efficiency has declined sharply, really over the last 5 years, but especially over the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. Now we are pulling out volume. So this is a player that, can no longer compensate for volume losses with big time efficiency. And a lot of that, I think, can be attributed to his supporting cast. Because, right now, look, I love Devontae Adams, but Allen Lazard has to be one of the weakest number 2 receivers in the league. Now he's going to be a 3rd-year undrafted free agent. I think he had over 70 yards once all last season. Aaron Rodgers is no longer a 300-yard game quarterback, and he is really become a risk-averse quarterback too, in and of himself. He's a player that is more willing. He's starting to lead the league in throwaways and statistics like that, and not throwing interceptions, and being a conservative player on the field, not wanting to turn the football over, and that really does not play in a low volume passing offense well from a fantasy standpoint. So, yeah, they're building this offense to almost have there be a smooth transition to their next quarterback whom they traded up for in the draft, and not to put up gaudy passing statistics. And every time I look at Aaron Rodgers in my rankings, I'm like, maybe I should put him lower. And I know I'm lower than him on him than consensus. I think I have him quarterback 16 right now. And he's not a quarterback that I'm targeting whatsoever in fantasy in 2020.
All right, let's stay in the NFC North because I think among the people who are really into this, the quote unquote experts, the analysts, Matthew Stafford is probably the favorite late round quarterback among the industry right now. I think that's going to cause his ADP to eventually rise. But for now, it's at 156.3, the QB 13. I mean, he was absolutely absurd before the injury last year. We talked about it some. You can go to Pat Thorman's article about FFPC best ball values. He highlighted Matthew Stafford's pace last year, which would have been the quarterback 2 behind only Lamar Jackson. I mean, that's how hot Matthew Stafford was before his injury in midseason. Obviously, at 156.3, Matthew Stafford is a value. At what point would you consider Matthew Stafford not to be a value? Because, man, I think it's going to rise pretty sharply. And I guess the other question is he your favorite late round quarterback right now if he sticks at 156.3?
Well, I worry about the back injury, and it's a recurring back injury, and not that he's not someone that, like in best ball, where if you lose your quarterback, you lose your quarterback, and you can't just pick up another quarterback after you probably drafted 2, and you're down to 1 quarterback, and you can encounter like bye week issues, or God forbid if that quarterback gets injured for a week or 2, like you're out of it. Mm-hmm. You're taking zeros at the quarterback position where you usually get 20 plus a week, and like you can't afford that. So some of these quarterbacks, these late round quarterbacks, I think you should approach with more caution in best ball leagues. And I think that Matthew Stafford is one of them. I think that Ben Roethlisberger is also one of them. But from a season-long redraft standpoint where, hey, if the guy goes down, you could just drop him and pick up somebody off the waiver wire who's probably going to give you, decent production, and you can figure it out. You can stream at quarterback. I think Matthew Stafford is a great, great pick. As you mentioned, through 8 weeks last season, first of all, the Lions were a lot better than people remember. They were 3-4-1 through 8 games. They had a 1-point loss to Kansas City. I'm sorry, a 4-point loss to Kansas City and a 1-point loss to Green Bay. They were averaging 25.5 points per game, which would have ranked 8th in the NFL. 391 yards from scrimmage per game. That would have ranked 4th in the NFL. Stafford on pace for 38 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. This was all under first-year offensive coordinator Darrell Bevell, and I really like the way that he designed the Lions' offense. They really tried to capitalize. Stafford's ADOT and his yards per attempt had really suffered in the previous seasons under Jim Bob Cooter and the offensive coordinators that they were trotting out before that. Under Darrell Bevell, his ADOT shot up to 11.4, which was the highest in the league. He also led the league in percentage of passes delivered 20-plus yards downfield. Almost 20% of his passes were thrown 20 or more yards downfield. That does not include rack. That is just pass like air yard passes of 20 yards or more. So, and I think that Darrell Bevell just really did a good job of capitalizing on his strengths and on the strengths of the supporting cast of the Lions. And the Lions, if you want to bet on continuity this year, they're bringing back their top 3 receivers. They're bringing back their second-year tight end, who I still think is going to be a stud, in T.J. Hockenson. They're bringing back their quarterback. They're bringing back their OC. They're bringing back their HC. The only real turnover is at running back, and who cares? You can hit the ground running at running back, and 3 of 5 offensive line starters. So Matthew Stafford is in a good position to crush his ADP, to have one of the best seasons of his career, and the big hurdle is going to be that concern over his back.
Yeah. And also DeAndre Swift plays very, very well in the pass game too. I think it sets up well. One thing you can check out in the draft kit, I did an article about position allocation in best ball. And if you end up, like one way I like to take Stafford in best ball would if you take 3. And the way you take 3, and we went back and back tested this and did a bunch of math. And the way you take 3, you can't take a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or even tier 4 quarterback. If you want to take 3 quarterbacks on your best ball team, you take 3 late round, like 3 of the guys we're talking about today. So maybe it's Ryan, Stafford, and Ben or something like that. So that if one of them goes down, you have 2. If one of them underperforms, you have 2, and the math kind of backs that up. If you end up taking a Mahomes or Deshaun or Russ, you almost should always end up with just 2 quarterbacks, assuming 20 round best ball drafts, which they aren't all that. But anyways, you can read the article to more on that for how you should be aligning positions in best ball. Okay, I do want to mention Daniel Jones. Even though we spent a lot of time on Daniel Jones already, we can talk about him quickly. We've talked about the schedule concerns. It's certainly a concern. It lightens up after the first month or so. My point with Daniel Jones is just kind of similar to the point I had on Tyler Higbee, where you don't see rookie quarterbacks very often put up 4 30-point DraftKings games in 12 starts. Like, it just doesn't happen that often. And Daniel Jones was able to do that. I mean, just flashing an absolutely huge ceiling, I think, with Evan Ingram healthy. And that was without all his guys healthy. Like, Barkley was on high ankle sprain. Evan Ingram was hurt at times. Golden Tate, Sterling Shep, they were all hurt at various times. They actually have pretty good weapons. So I understand the schedule concerns. Daniel Jones showed me a ceiling we don't often see from rookie quarterbacks, has plenty of rushing equity. So I still really like Daniel Jones if you can avoid him for that first part of his schedule, which we mentioned previously. So his ADP is currently 161.6, QB 14 in FFPC. I think he can certainly provide a profit on that, and one of my favorite late round quarterback targets. Anything we haven't said about Daniel Jones, Evan, you want to mention?
Yeah, just reiterating that schedule, that early schedule. The Giants face the Steelers in week 1. They go to Soldier Field in week 2, and then week 3 they are at home against the 49ers. I think it loosens up after that pretty considerably. At the Rams, no Wade Phillips. Their defense lost a ton of talent in the offseason. I think that Daniel Jones might end up on a lot of waiver wires after week 3, and then this will be the time to pick him up at Dallas, probably playing indoors and in a likely shootout, and then going back home against the Redskins. I'm not really afraid of the Redskins. I know they have some talent in their front seven, but I still think they can give up big games to opposing quarterbacks. And I really, really still love him as a best ball pick because just the fact that he might start off a little bit slow. It's not going to hurt you as much. Maybe look for a later round quarterback to pair with him who does have a favorable schedule to be your quarterback too. But I think that this schedule thing is going to ultimately push Daniel Jones down in terms of ADP into a spot where he can become like a smashing value because I think the upside is still there. He is really athletic. He can absolutely add production with his legs. The Jason Garrett thing, still sticks in the back of my mind. It's something that I don't like for him. But he's got a lot of weaponry. Their offensive line is better, and the way that he plays is conducive to scoring a lot of fantasy points. And we did see big time flashes of that last year.
For sure. Okay, I want to talk about Baker Mayfield because we have not spent a lot of time on Baker Mayfield so far this offseason. Currently, the QB 15, 172.5 ADP. The thing about Baker, man, I mean, like, as you mentioned, he was like a tier 2, tier 3 quarterback last year. People were taking him very, very high. Has an awful sophomore year. We can maybe chalk a lot of that up to coaching. I mean, there was some egregious coaching decisions from the Browns. And I think the concern this year is that they're going to be, under Kevin Stefanski, extremely 12 set heavy with Austin Hooper and David Njoku, that Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry are both coming off of surgeries, that they're going to play run heavy with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb, that they're going to play extremely slow, and it's going to be tough for Baker to find a ceiling. And so I get all those concerns. I still think that there's a lot of talent here. I mean, this offense is extremely talented. There's a lot of talent here, enough for Baker to find a ceiling. I'm concerned with some of the stuff, with the way they're going to play to some degree in general. But anyways, we haven't talked a lot about the Browns pass game this offseason at all. I'm curious just to get your general take.
I think that they're going to be a smash mouth balanced team, balanced in terms of run pass ratio. And, they're going to run a lot of 2 and maybe even 3 tight end sets with Austin Hooper, David Njoku, and Harrison Bryant, who was the Mackey Award winner this past year in college football. They got him stole him in the 4th round. They traded for a fullback, Andy Janovich. They gave Kareem Hunt a 2nd round tender. Probably could have kept him on the original round tender, but they gave him a 2nd round tender. They signed Jack Conklin. You look at Kevin Stefanski's history, what he did in Minnesota last year, and I think Baker's going to be a lot more efficient. And I don't know about him breaking out from, in terms of having a really big statistical season. Mm-hmm. I'm sort of on the fence with him. I don't have a really strong lean in either direction. I do think he's going to be more efficient. but I don't think this is going to be a high volume throw ball offense.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So we'll see on Baker. I don't think the scheme, as Evan said, is set up for him to absolutely smash, and so some of these guys have much better chances to do so. Speaking of scheme, I want to mention Jared Goff. There are some people, and I may have been one of them, unfortunately, and I'm mostly just joking, who have called Sean McVay a fake sharp, right? Everybody thought that Sean McVay was like the sharpest dude in the entire NFL. Last season, I mean, you've mentioned how teams figured out his 11 personnel offense, how teams figured out what they were doing, were able to stop it a lot. I mean, they have made some very, very questionable personnel moves, contractual moves. They spent a second round pick in back to back years at the running back position. They have massive offensive line problems. I think Jared Goff, people would say he's a system quarterback. The system better be working. And now they lose Brandon Cooks. They're going to replace him with Josh Reynolds, who I think is just meh, and Van Jefferson, who I know the prospect community was kind of down on. So Jared Goff is currently QB 16, 203.8. I would certainly would prefer Daniel Jones, probably would prefer Ben Roethlisberger. And then we'll talk about some other guys later, like Teddy Bridgewater, and maybe some of those guys even further down who I think I might prefer to Jared Goff. You did have Jared Goff in the tail end of your top 150, though, so it sounds like you might be a little bit higher on him than I am.
Yeah, I think he's right at quarterback 15, and I think he might actually be the number 150 overall player or something, somewhere real close to that. Yeah, I really like his weapons. I mean, from wide receiver 1 through wide receiver 4, I think they've got 4 legit NFL players. That's obviously Cooper Kupp. I think he's a difference maker in the slot. Robert Woods, I think he's a borderline difference maker as, the best rushing wide receiver in the NFL and also one of the best route running receivers in the NFL. Josh Reynolds, I think, can fill that Brandon Cooks role. I mean, Brandon Cooks over his previous 16 games had like 640 receiving yards. I think that Josh Reynolds can do that. And then Van Jefferson is a guy that they think that can play all 3 receiver positions. I think might replace Cooper Kupp if he leaves in free agency. They have not given Cooper Kupp an extension yet, and then or Robert Woods. So I like their receiver core, and then their tight end core. I mean, they've got Higbee and Everett, and Everett was playing ahead of Higbee and playing pretty well for most of last season. Higbee comes in, just tears the absolute cover off over the last 5 games. They've got depth, I think, at running back. What really torpedoed Jared Goff's season last year, and he was an efficient player in 2017 and 2018, and the bottom fell out really last year for him because their pass protection waned so much. I mean, they took a really big step back in terms of pass protection. They did have a couple of rookies that stepped up and played for them last season, but it's going to be another year of offensive line turnover for them. And I think there are legit questions on their offensive line. And Jared Goff is just he's really, really sensitive to pressure. But, he still turned in big games. Like when you could get him in a good spot, when he'd be at home against a team that could not rush the passer, it was like, we're playing him in DFS this week. Mm-hmm. And, he would hit more often than not. Yeah. So I don't know. He's almost like a quarterback that I'm cool with streaming in season long, but and I mean I'm cool with taking him in best ball. I don't know. I have him priced at quarterback 15, and I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, TD rate for Jared Goff last year was only 3.5%. I mean, that's really, really low. He was at 5.7% in 2018, 5.9% in 2017. If he can even get back up to 4.5%, I think he'll be fine. But yeah, I think losing Brandon Cooks, even though his production wasn't there, it still takes something away from the offense for sure. And they're changing a lot. I expect them to play a lot with Higbee and Everett on the field at the same time. All right, let's move to some of these really later round options. We're going to skip over Ben Roethlisberger and Burrow and Drew Lock. We've spent enough time on them already. Let's go to Teddy Bridgewater, 279.1 QB 21. I mean, I know Evan is excited about the way Carolina's offense sets up this year. If you like Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel and Ian Thomas, you should like Teddy Bridgewater. What we saw last year from Teddy Bridgewater in New Orleans when he got spot starts was way more aggression than I thought we would see. And I know that his ADOT was really, really low. But that's kind of just the way New Orleans plays. I think his ADOT in Carolina will be much higher. He has Robbie Anderson. He has Curtis Samuel. He has DJ Moore. He has Christian McCaffrey. He has Ian Thomas. He has an atrocious defense. It's really low. I mean, 279.1 QB 21. I know you're tempted on Teddy Bridgewater. Evan, talk to me about him.
Yeah, I did I've done a few tweets about Teddy Bridgewater's fantasy outlook, and it's funny. Like you get like pushback about the quarterback, 21 in ADP, and it's like the fish are starting to come out. They're starting to come out. But yeah, I mean Teddy Bridgewater, his cost in drafts is so minimal right now. You could literally get him as your quarterback 3. Um, and I think he's going to be a really underrated quarterback too. And I think that he has been depicted as a game manager by myself included, and I think that has been an accurate way to depict Teddy Bridgewater to this point. But I think that there are a lot of reasons to think that Teddy Bridgewater's his statistics this year could go beyond like game manager statistics because of the situation. The Panthers can surround him with one of the best young pass catcher cores in the league, and that's from DJ Moore to Curtis Samuel to Robbie Anderson, who at very worst is like a dynamic role player. Ian Thomas has really shined in past opportunities to play in place of Greg Olsen. He's going to get that full-time opportunity this year. They hired Joe Brady to be their OC. They do not have continuity in the coaching staff, and I do think that that's somewhat of a concern. But I think that concern is mitigated by the fact that Teddy Bridgewater was with Joe Brady with the Saints in 2017. And Joe Brady then went on to coach or to be the passing game coordinator at LSU. And that was, maybe the best passing game in college football history. And then I think that, because this defense, I mean, it's incredible. All the talent that the Panthers lost on defense, and they weren't a good defense to begin with. They lost Luke Kuechly, who might be a Hall of Famer. James Bradbury, easily their number 1 cornerback. Eric Reed led them in tackles. He's gone. Mario Addison led them in sacks. He's gone. Bruce Irvin went back to Seattle. He had 8.5 sacks for them last year. Vernon Butler went to Buffalo. He had 6 sacks last year. Gerald McCoy had 5 sacks. He's gone. Dontari Poe, who started 10 games for them on the interior last year, he's gone to Dallas. They're starting nickelback, Javian Elliott. Ross Cockrell, who played 75% of the snaps in their defensive secondary last year, played some safety, some outside corner, some slot corner. He's gone. And then if you look at their early season schedule, it is highly, highly favorable. At least within the first 5 games, there are 3 smash spots at home against the Raiders in week 1, at home against the Cardinals in week 4, and then in week 5, visiting the Falcons inside that dome where lots and lots of points get scored. I think that Bridgewater is a guy that can absolutely start fast. And I think he's going to need to start fast because I think that this is going to be a team that loses a lot of games like 31-24, 34-27.
Yeah, totally agree on Teddy. And I think if you're taking that 3 late round quarterback strategy for best ball, I like pairing Stafford, Bridgewater, and one other one that you like to give you 3. And I think you can do that really affordably. Speaking of affordably, like in the previous eras of fantasy football, like Ryan Tannehill would be like a high pick. People would be all excited about Ryan Tannehill because he had such a good year last year. He was QB9 last year in points per game. But the community has advanced so much that he's now QB20. 221.4, and I get it. His TD rate, his yards per attempt were like Hall of Fame type numbers. Obviously, that's not going to sustain, but we should see more volume out of Ryan Tannehill this year. He still gives you rushing equity. He still has AJ Brown. I think Ryan Tannehill, and I think we might disagree a little bit here. I think Ryan Tannehill is actually a value at his cost, not by a lot, but I think that he's actually at 221.4 QB20. I actually prefer to be above market on Ryan Tannehill. I still prefer Teddy, but I think Ryan Tannehill is going to be fine. Like, the market is over adjusted to his numbers, his rates from last year. So where you at with Ryan Tannehill?
Yeah, I think that Ryan Tannehill is like the anti Teddy Bridgewater, a guy who is going to be a game manager, or has been a game manager and is going to remain a game manager. First of all, Derrick Henry drew the softest schedule in the league from a run defense standpoint, and also the Titans drew the second easiest schedule overall from an opponent win totals based standpoint. Mm-hmm. And if you look at Ryan Tannehill's schedule, especially to open the season, it is brutal. At Denver in week 1, especially in those weeks 1 and 2 games, going to Denver is one of the worst places that you can possibly begin your season. You're immediately going to play like in the mountains. Warren Sharp has shown that over the last 20 years, the Broncos have some insane 900% win percentage over the last 20 years when they play at Denver in weeks 1 and 2. Week 2 at home against Jacksonville. I mean, that's Derrick Henry's running for 250 yards and 4 touchdowns. Then at Minnesota, facing a defense, in the Vikings that is definitely undergoing a lot of change, but is still coached by Mike Zimmer, and I don't think that that's any kind of a gimme. And then against the Steelers and the Bills, two of the top 5 pass defenses in the league to round out those first 5 games. So Tannehill, he's a guy I'm fine with, taking in best ball, I'd say. But, man, he's not someone that I'm going out of my way to draft. And he's certainly due for a ton of regression from an efficiency standpoint. Led the NFL in yards per attempt, led the NFL in yards per completion, and in passer rating. And, we saw what happened in those playoff games, and that's a little bit scary where he just gets into a situation where he's just handing the ball off to Derrick Henry. And so that lowers his ceiling and his floor. And look, I think the Titans are going to be a good team this year. I like the over on their 8.5 game win total. And I think that Tannehill is good as a piece of the puzzle in their offense. But I think that in fantasy, just too many red flags, too many negatives for me to I would definitely take Teddy over him, and I'd probably take Gardner Minshew over him.
Yep. Okay, we'll get to Minshew in a second. You mentioned handing the ball off a ton. That's what Jimmy Garoppolo did in a lot of the games last year when San Francisco was just dominating on defense. If you think there's room for regression and, year-over-year stickiness of defense is very light, and I think San Francisco's defense is going to regress to some degree. Maybe we see more volume from Jimmy Garoppolo. And if we see more volume, well, he was very efficient last year. It's really, to me, a bet on how good you think the 49ers will be. If they're as good as they were last year defensively and running the ball, I think this 288 ADP QB 22 for Jimmy Garoppolo is right. But if their defense regresses, if their run game regresses, there's a lot of ways that it can go worse for San Francisco, and they need more out of Jimmy G. Well, then you might be talking about a value. So Jimmy Garoppolo at QB 22, Evan, I believe that you like him at that price.
Yes, I do. And I think that he's a player that is going to continue to be highly efficient within the context of, a beautifully orchestrated offense where they upgraded by trading up in the first round for another receiver in Brandon Ayuk. And George Kittle just played he played last season, on one leg. Mm-hmm. And was still a massive difference maker. Deebo Samuel entering his second year. I really liked how the offensive line is coming together even after losing Joe Staley to retirement. Of course, they trade for Trent Williams. Mike McGlinchey is back. And I think that defensively, they had some holes defensively last year. They weren't a shutdown defense for the entirety of the season. They still have questions at the number 2 cornerback position, and now Richard Sherman is a year older. So I definitely think that they could be put in maybe some higher scoring situations this year, and Jimmy Garoppolo's pass attempts could rise. Jimmy G is now, by the way, 21-5 in his career with a Super Bowl berth. And people still say that this guy sucks. This past year, he was number 3 in yards per attempt among quarterbacks. He was number 7 in touchdown rate, number 8 in passer rating. And last year, it was a perfect kind of storm for the 49ers to win with the formula that they did. And I do think it's likely that they have to throw the ball more often this year. And then if you look at the schedule that he opens up with, super, super favorable. This is a guy that if you want to take Daniel Jones, take Jimmy Garoppolo 2 rounds later in your best ball draft. And I think you're going to, you will have a quarterback that is going to have a really favorable schedule early in the season, complementing a quarterback whose schedule is going to open up just in time for Garoppolo's to get a little bit tougher in weeks 1 through 6. This is at home against the Cardinals. Garoppolo faces at home versus the Cardinals in week 1, at the Jets in week 2, at home against the Eagles in a potential shootout in week 3. I'm sorry, the Giants before that, and the Giants, they're a definite shootout team. And then finishing up with the Dolphins and the Rams over those first 6 games. I mean, I think that might be the easiest or the most fantasy friendly weeks 1 through 6 schedule of any quarterback in the league that Jimmy Garoppolo drew for 2020.
Yeah, Jimmy Garoppolo, also one of the founding members of Team Sex, for sure. Jimmy Garoppolo. Okay, some really late guys here that I want to mention: Tyrod Taylor and Gardner Minshew. The question with Tyrod is, A, how much will he run at this point in his career? He's getting older as a mobile quarterback. Can we rely on that as much? B, how much is Anthony Lynn going to mess this thing up and not let Tyrod Taylor spread his wings? And C, when will they go to the rookie, Justin Herbert? So those are all questions why Tyrod Taylor is like undrafted in most leagues right now completely. I understand he has awesome weapons. I mean, God, you could argue he has some of the best weapons in the entire league with Mike Williams and Keenan and Hunter Henry. Shout out to Donald Parham, Eckler, et cetera, et cetera. But there are concerns with Tyrod, as I mentioned at the top. But again, he's free. So I'm curious if you think Tyrod should be drafted in some of these leagues where most teams emerge with 2 and sometimes 3 quarterbacks.
And I think that just because the likelihood that Justin Herbert gets in there, or just the probability that happens, based historically, because these quarterbacks that go in the top 10, they play. But I do think that you can kind of theorize a scenario where Tyrod hangs on to this job longer than expected because the Chargers, well, first of all, the schedule, again, is really in working in his favor. I think that he will keep the job as long as he is successful. And I think the Chargers can be successful facing this schedule with the personnel that they have. They also have a lot of continuity. I mean, Anthony Lynn is coming back as the head coach. The defensive coordinator, Gus Bradley, is back. They got a lot more talented on defense aside from just getting back Derwin James. The offensive coordinator who replaced Ken Wisenhunt, Shane Steichen, he is back as well. And Tyrod Taylor knows him because he was the quarterback's coach before that. So he's got a year in the system. Justin Herbert, probably, just limited reps. It looks like we are going to get, maybe a decent chunk of training camp this year, but I think he's still going to be in a limited rep situation. And Tyrod Taylor, with that running ability and with all those weapons, Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, I think he's pretty much set up for success. Let's talk about the schedule real quick, though. Week 1 at the Bengals. I mean, I don't think anyone is going to be afraid of the Bengals defense this year. Go back home and face the Chiefs in a potential shootout in week 2. Staying at home in week 3 to face the Panthers, maybe the worst defense in the league. Mm-hmm. After that, they go face the Bucs. I think that could be challenging, but also has some chances to be high scoring. Then at the Superdome, same sort of situation. Come back home, face the Jets. Incredible matchup there. Then they face the Dolphins, and then the Jaguars, and then the Raiders. So, as long as Tyrod can keep this job, I mean, I think that he's going to hover in that 10 to 14 range among quarterbacks with some spikes mixed in against some of these weaker defenses.
Yeah, okay. And the other guy who's undrafted that we need to mention is Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew has Jay Gruden now, who I don't want to call him a quarterback whisperer, but has done okay things with the quarterbacks that he's had. He has some reasonable weapons in DJ Shark. They drafted Laviska Shenault. Gardner Minshew gives you a little bit of rushing equity. I'm not too excited about Gardner Minshew. I think we can do better with like our QB3 pick, but I think there's some reason for optimism on him. And we really haven't spent any time this offseason on the Jaguars pass game. We've talked a lot about Leonard Fournette's situation, but yeah, in general, what do you think about the Jaguars pass game?
Well, I think that Gardner Minshew in some ways fits the bill of quarterbacks that have had success in Jay Gruden's system. Now, this offense does have turnover. They're changing offensive coordinators. But I like Jay Gruden. And, I mean, he's had success with Andy Dalton. He's had success with Kirk Cousins. And I think that he has shown some ability to get the most out of his quarterbacks. I think they've got, enough talent there in Jacksonville to work around Tyler Eifert, went there after actually Tyler Eifert played 16 games last season. I know that his snaps were down, but finally played 16 games this past season. He knows Jay Gruden, of course, from Cincinnati. DJ Shark just absolutely blew up in his second season. I think that he has a chance to continue to get better. Keelan Cole is back. Dede Westbrook is back. Chris Conley is back. So they do have personnel continuity. And then, I think that Gardner Minshew, one thing that really stands out about Gardner Minshew is his rushing ability. This past year, didn't start all the games, still finished fifth with the fifth most rushing yards among quarterbacks. He's added nearly 23 yards per game on the ground. And he scored 0 rushing touchdowns, and I think that he could regress positively there. I mean, if he scores 2 or 3 this year, that's really going to help him from a spiked week standpoint and from a final scoring standpoint. And his price is just is so cheap right now. I think the Jaguars are going to be bad defensively. He's going to be in some, Blake Bortles 2016 sort of scenarios. And that running ability is really going to come in handy, and he's going to beat expectations as long as he holds on to the job. And I think that he is going to hold on to the job because it doesn't look like the Jaguars have any interest in Cam Newton, and it looks more like they're tanking.
Yeah. I was actually looking at some 2021 prospect sheets, and there's 3 quarterbacks in like the top 5 of a lot of these guys overall prospects. So yeah, I mean, Jaguars certainly setting themselves up to get one of Trevor Lawrence, Josh Fields, or the kid from North Dakota State, who everybody seems to be high on. Okay, that's going to do it for these. Hey, special star on the show. Hey, Blair. That's going to do it for this show. If you guys aren't following us on Twitter, by the way, and I know some of you aren't, really, if you're trying to win and you're trying really hard, you need to be on Twitter, not just to follow us, but because that's where all the information is. That's where the information is first. Well, the best information is. So follow at Establish the Run on Twitter. Follow at Evan Silva, at Adam Levitan on Twitter. For Blair, for Evan, for Jerry, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.